During Jesus' time, women's testimony were considered less than men. Now, of course, this is very different than how we view things today, but by the end of this video, you're going to see how this reality gives us evidence that Jesus actually did come back from the dead. So in the Bible, we have four different books, four different accounts of Jesus' life on earth. We call these the Gospels, and they're the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, these four different Gospels have four different authors who give us different perspectives and insights into Jesus' life. Sometimes Matthew might include something that John doesn't, or Luke may have a detail that Mark doesn't include. But together, all four of these accounts and perspectives blend together to give us a more complete picture of who Jesus is. Now, something crazy, like absolutely wild, that all four Gospels agree on is that women were the first witnesses of Jesus' resurrection. Now, today we might hear that and go, okay, yeah, big deal. Like that doesn't really sound that crazy, but during Jesus' time, this was an absolutely wild thing to claim. During Jesus' time, women's testimony was not valued the same as a man's testimony. Sometimes women weren't even allowed to testify in court at all. If you were making a big claim, you wouldn't stake it on a woman's testimony. Now, of course, we don't believe that same thing today, but this was a huge reality during Jesus' time. When it comes to Jesus' resurrection, this is like the central claim of Christianity. It's so important that the Apostle Paul writes this. He says, "And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile and you are still in your sins." If Jesus did not come back from the dead, then Christianity is entirely useless. So quite literally, our entire belief hinges on Jesus coming back from the dead. This is arguably the most important claim ever made in history. So if this is true, that Jesus' resurrection is the single most important claim to Christianity, and the gospel writers know this when they're writing this down, why would they include that women were the first witnesses of Jesus' resurrection? The authors of the Gospels were Jewish men. They totally understood how this would sound to people hearing it. If the Bible were simply a man-made invention, this would be a really weird thing to include. Generally, if you're trying to make a big claim, you would want very credible witnesses. And the reality is, during Jesus' time, women were not seen as credible witnesses. Now, to make things even more crazy, one of the women that Jesus first appeared to, Mary Magdalene, used to be demon-possessed. We can read about this in Luke chapter 8. So when we look at all four of the Gospels, including that women were the first witnesses of Jesus' empty tomb, one of those women even being demon-possessed, this is really hard to explain unless it actually happened. In fact, these testimonies actually would have hurt the credibility of these claims in Jesus' time. There'd be no reason for the authors to include this if they had simply made these events up. Now, of course, these testimonies alone do not prove that Jesus came back from the dead, but the inconvenient nature of these women's testimonies do give us evidence that it happened. Even Jesus' own apostles struggled to believe the women's testimony at first. We can read this in Luke 24. The Gospels, including testimonies of women, is beautiful because it demonstrates Jesus and the Bible elevating the position of women. The reality is, women were not viewed nearly the same way as they are today. It's not a coincidence that Jesus chose to first appear to women. Even during a time in history where in many ways women weren't considered of equal value to men, Jesus chose to elevate the value of women. And by elevating women in this way, Jesus gives us further proof that the resurrection actually did happen. I hope this video was helpful to you. God bless, and I'll see you in the next video.